So this is really starting from the very time that you are born in terms of this conditioning that you're subjected to. And over time, what happens is you end up believing these three core lies that I've identified are the source of our unhappiness. And the first one is that you're not good enough. No matter what you do, you will never, ever be good enough. The second is that you have to achieve all of these external outcomes that are set by society. And the third is that you have to do everything by yourself. You can never lean on anybody. You can never ask for help. You have to struggle through life all alone.
Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the Better Podcast. My name is Dr. Stephanie Estima, and today I have a delightful conversation for you with my new best friend, Stephanie Harrison. I don't think she knows that, but that's what we're calling it. She is the author of The New Happy, and she is the founder of The New Happy, which is a company helping individuals and communities apply this philosophy in their lives. The New Happy's art, newsletter, podcast, and programs reach millions of people around the world each month. She has a master's degree in positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania. And previously, she was the director of learning at Thrive Global. So what is the new happy? Well, in order to understand the new happy, you need to deconstruct the old happy. And that's what we talk about in our conversation today. So we talk about this idea that in our upbringing, we have talked about individualism, capitalism, and domination. So these lies that we are not enough, you'll only be happy when you achieve the next big thing in your life, and that you're on your own, right? So that you can never ask people for help because that means that you're weak or you're dumb or you're stupid or something like that. And so we deconstruct how each of these lies have been integrated into our upbringing. She gives the example of, we celebrate when a baby can sleep through the night by themselves. We celebrate, these firsts where the baby moves from being a dependent or a codependent on mom to being by themselves. And then we move into understanding the new happy. So in order to do that, we need to really reframe what happiness is. So we talk about this idea of uncovering your gifts. And how we do that is through our humanity, so who we are, our talents, what we do, and our wisdom, what we know. And this was such a wonderful conversation. I enjoyed every moment of it. We went off on a lot of different tangents, but I think that this is going to be an incredibly useful conversation if you yourself have been struggling to find your gifts, or maybe you're like I was a couple of years ago where I was in a private physical practice, very happy, with the money coming in and all of that, but feeling unsatisfied, feeling like I had more to give, and then making kind of a bigger shift in my own professional life. So maybe that's where you are, or maybe, you're mid 40s and you're like, all right, I've been serving lots of other people for decades. It's time for me to get, clear on who I am and how I want to be and how I want to show up in this life. So I think that this is a really important conversation. Stephanie really explains her concepts very well, very easy to understand. So please enjoy my conversation with Stephanie Harrison. Stephanie Harrison, welcome to the Better Podcast.
I'm so happy to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
Well, we are going to talk about happiness today, which I think is a through line for all walks of life. And we lovingly call our listeners our Betties, listening to the Better Podcast. And one of the things that you write about in your new book, The New Happy, is that every single one of us wants to be happy. It could be the job that you're interviewing for, the new exercise program that you're starting, the new food program, the person you're dating, the weekend plans, your dreams and aspirations. All of these things at the end of the day are a way for us to find and cultivate our happiness. Mm-hmm. And I think that we just, maybe by way of definition to start off, I think the word happy is maybe a bit vague. I think that it can mean a lot of different things. It's very subjective. Yeah. So let's start by talking about what happiness is. And then potentially I'd like to move into a conversation around how, at least growing up in a Western, society in North America, how that may be and how that has been distorted, and how I too have been subject to said distortion.
All of us.
All of us have, right?
Not just you.
So let's talk a little bit about what happiness is, and then we can start contrasting between sort of like the old guard versus what you're proposing as a new philosophical premise in this book.
Yeah. So as you're completely right. Happiness is such a vague, messy term. And so what happens is we tend to either throw our own beliefs onto that word and then we define it for ourselves, or more likely, we are given a whole set of instructions about what happiness is, and then we internalize those and pursue it. And so many people, when I say happiness, I think they immediately jump to like the feeling of happiness, like feelings of pleasure or ecstasy or joy. And that's an important part of living a happy life. But what I'm talking about when I use the word happiness is something that's broader, more of a state of being or a way of living your life. It's something that's much more all-encompassing than just those moments of happiness, like when you're eating a great ice cream cone or when you win a prize or you have something great happen in your life. It's something more expansive than that.
Yeah. And one of the fallacies, and we'll get into this in a moment, I spoke to other scientists and researchers on happiness, is this idea that we should be happy all the time. Yeah. That if we're not happy, then we're failing at life. We're failing at the job, we're failing at the marriage, we're failing at the exercise program, we're failing at the insert goal, dream here, right?
Yeah.
In your estimation, is it important for us to be happy, this state of being all the time? Or is it a contrast to some of the other elements that are, that a human might experience, sadness, grief, etc.?
I think that I've sort of come to believe that if you're thinking about how happiness feels to you, I think that the best way to describe it for me is like it's a state of being where you're connected to yourself or to others or to the world. It's that sense of connection, really, that ultimately drives us. And what that means is that inevitably you are always going to also experience all of those other emotions like sadness and grief and anger, because you're engaged in relationship with people and with things, and not everything goes the way that we want it to go. We're always going to be navigating the complexities of being connected to one another. And so, if you love somebody, eventually that you will lose them in one way or another. And that brings grief. But then if you didn't love them, then you would miss out on all of the joy and the beauty of that relationship. Every emotion has an important purpose, and they all belong under the auspice of living a happy life, in my opinion.
Yeah, beautifully said. I think that you can't know joy without sadness, and you can't know elation without depression, or like maybe not clinical depression, but sort of the opposite of that. There's like no yin without the yang.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the distortions around our understanding of happiness. And you talk about this in the book, and I really appreciated it because I was like, oh yeah, those are all, I think I used to think of all of those things as very important. You write in the book, the world has told us that happiness comes from being perfect or being close to perfect, making more money, and then more money, and then more money after that, acquiring more and more stuff, conforming to a prescribed path, working harder and harder and harder, never resting, never slowing down. Every woman listening is like, oh God, I totally, yes, there I am. Gaining fame, popularity and acclaim, competing against others, etc. So you talk about like this sort of old guard or this old happy versus new happy in the book. And I thought we might explore the building blocks of the old happy just to illustrate to our listeners what it is that we're talking about. And then we can compare that with your new proposed new happy paradigm. So let's talk a little bit about that.
That's great. I think the first thing I always want to say to people is if you're not happy, it's not your fault. It's the fault of all of these messages that you have grown up receiving. And this old happy that you just described so beautifully, I argue that it comes from these societal forces that are so much bigger than we are, which are individualism, which is essentially the belief that you're separate from others, capitalism, which is about incentivizing more and more and consumption and disconnection from our world, and then domination, which is all about believing that some people are better than others and creating institutions and systems that enforce that. And so these three forces, which I know are big and seem like they might be disconnected from your daily life, they, in fact, from the time that you are born, they become a part of who you are through the societal conditioning that you're subjected to. So for example, in an individualistic culture, when a baby is born, the first success in a baby's life is how quickly they can be independent from their mothers or from their families, how they can sleep by themselves, or how long they can go without needing support. And that's very different to collectivist cultures where those milestones are not celebrated in the same way. So this is really starting from the very time that you are born in terms of this conditioning that you're subjected to. And over time, what happens is you end up believing these three core lies that I've identified are the source of our unhappiness. And the first one is that you're not good enough. No matter what you do, you will never, ever be good enough. The second is that you have to achieve all of these external outcomes that are set by society. And the third is that you have to do everything by yourself. You can never lean on anybody. You can never ask for help. You have to struggle through life all alone.
Like every woman's like, aren't I supposed to do that? Aren't I supposed to push my baby out and then, be back to my size, whatever it was, pre-baby body size 2 weeks later, and I can push the pram in heels and, full
while I'm
makeup.
Like doing my executive job.
Yeah, exactly. Taking a Zoom call in my heels, pushing exactly. Right. And doing it all by myself. No nanny, no mom around to help, no grandmothers, no aunts, no one. You're just doing it everything.
Yeah.
God, it's such a pervasive lie. But when you break it down like that, what you just said really resonated with me, where we celebrate our babies' milestones by how quickly they can be autonomous and, self-sufficient. And that's, how quickly they can sleep on their own. And I've always just naturally very much resisted that because I too enjoy sleeping or, sleeping with my children. Like I love sleep. I breastfed them for a long time and all that, but I also just loved snuggling with them. And I hated the narrative that was sort of coming from the parents and the in-laws. Like, they gotta sleep by themselves.
Separate them, right?
Like, separate them. Or like the sleep training where it's like you let them cry it out. And it's like, I mean, no, sometimes you got to do it. I'm like, no judgment, but that for me, the way that I wanted to mother, it always felt really against the grain at my own cells to do that to my kids.
Interesting. It's so fascinating because if we think about that and we think about, like, I just want to call out that, of course, this is then further enabled by the systems that you're a part of. Because if you're a mom who has to get back to work within 2 months.
6 weeks,
because you have no maternity leave, which is obviously not something that's available here, then what choice do you have but to try and make your baby as independent as possible? It's these layers of not just the messages we receive, but then the ways that they're enforced by our culture and our policies and our society that make it feel impossible in some ways to fight against,
Yeah. I pulled out a quote. I really love this quote, and I just wanted to read it in our conversation and have you comment on it. This was under individualism. You said, this is a quote from someone else. Paradise is here. Paradise is right in front of us. In capitalism, what is engineered is engineered longing, and desire in us for what can be in the future. It's always about the next product, the next big thing. But what if we were actually content with our lives? What if we actually knew that this was paradise? We would be very hard to control.
Oof. I always get goosebumps.
That was under capitalism. Like, how crazy is that? If it's like, you actually don't need anything. Everything is all here right now.
Yeah. And yet we are out there being fed these messages about everything that we need to buy, everything that we have to continually consume in order to keep up, to participate, to be seen as valuable. And that's where it ties in with the domination stuff as well, because if some people are better than other people, then how do you demonstrate better? It's through what you achieve, what you buy, the way that you look, all of these things that we are sold as a pathway to happiness. And unfortunately, they don't work. They don't provide us with what we're looking for.
Yeah. And I think especially with this capitalism piece, it's like you can climb the ladder and you can get to the top. And then, guess what? Surprise, there's another building at the you've climbed to the top of this building, but now there's another one. And this one, how sweet would it be? And then, it's like you're serenaded into like, how great would it be to just climb this one, just this last one?
A little bit harder.
It's like the personal trainer who's like, you have 5 more. And then you do 5 more and they're like, just kidding. You have 3 more to do,
Oh my God. That's the most amazing analogy. Capitalism as the annoying personal trainer who convinces you to
about
do
the reps.
a little bit more. Exactly. I am obsessed with that.
But it's like you can never stop. You can never rest. And I think that this concept is so impactful to me because I identify with that. I think that as someone who sort of bought into that system and was like, yes, my worth is determined by my accolades, the letters behind my name, the amount of patients that I've treated, that blah, 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 blah. I still to this day, so just honesty, transparency, truthfulness, I have trouble resting and recovering, but as a woman in perimenopause in my 40s, this is like an essential skill that I need to master because I can no longer push myself in the way that I did because I completely burn out. Like I completely like on the bed, can't do anything for the day if I push myself, too hard for too long.
I'm so glad you said that because I think it's incredibly important for us to be open and honest about those struggles that we have and to not internalize it as a problem with us, which I think has been the dominant narrative. Like that's important. But then we blame ourselves for our struggles with it and we say, okay, like it's because I'm not good enough or I haven't done enough or I just am not able to figure out resting. But it's not you. It's the fact that you've been bathing in these influences and these forces for your entire life. And for every day of our lives, we've been fed these stories about what will make us happy. And part of what I argue in the book is that if everybody wants to be happy, if it's the biggest goal in our lives, if it drives everything that we do, then it's going to be really hard to ever ignore those signals and those messages about what happiness is and how to pursue it because it's our most cherished ambition. And so like deep down, there's a part of you that says, I can't rest because that'll mean that I'm not good enough and therefore I'll never get to be happy.
Yeah. And I think rest and recovery, and we'll get to this, but I think it's also a skill in the same way that you learn to sit through. Like I remember sitting through board exams and like not wanting to sit through,
I would imagine.
Time, right? Like you just learn to punch it out. You learn to deal with the pain. Your back hurts. You're, not moving properly. You're eating fast food. You just learn to habituate to that scenario in order to get through the hoop in order to chase happiness, as you're saying.
Yeah.
And I think that, just maybe we can shelf this, but I do feel, at least for me, the past several years, it's like I'm trying to acquire the skill of learning how to rest and recover, and then also to manage the voice in my head that tells me you're essentially worthless if you were just sitting on the couch or you're watching a show. You should be doing something else. Like, can't you just do the laundry at the same time? Like, can't you just watch?
Why can't you multitask?
Yeah. Why can't you multitask? That's, that like the biggest lie ever on the face of the planet is that women, that multitasking is a thing, but that there's also this pervasive myth that women are somehow better multitaskers than men. It's like, no, men have just said, no, that doesn't actually work.
And they're allowed to push back on it for some reason. And we're not. If we're sitting on the couch and not doing something simultaneously, like filling out the school forms or, like trying to stay on top of email, then we're bad. We're wasting our time.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about domination and then we can move into sort of the new paradigm, because domination is also an interesting one, especially when we look at it from a female lens. This idea that you need to compete and win. Some people are better than others and that you're never good enough. There's some hierarchy, it's unspoken. And so talk a little bit about that. And maybe if you're able to, if you have data and experience talking about this, how this might relate to women as well. How do we view domination?
Of course, women have been subjected to domination for our entire history and have been oppressed. And then when we break that down intersectionally and look at that by race and class, we can see even more how women are affected. And I think that it's so important for us to draw attention to this, especially when I think about some of the conversations that are happening at a global level. When I look at, for example, the business world and the ways in which women have tried to advance in the workplace and tried to do everything that they can to succeed and yet cannot ever rise to the level of men, even if they work twice as hard or even if they sacrifice more or conform to a specific norm of how they're supposed to perform and how they're supposed to behave. They're still punished in so many ways. And so we have all of these examples of how you can strive to adhere to the domination set of values that you're supposed to conform to, that ideal of who you're supposed to be in order to be able to acquire, succeed, and yet you still get punished. You still can't win in so many ways. You're still subjected to sexism or racism or classism or any of the other isms that might affect you. And I think that in order for us to experience any sort of lasting happiness as a society, we have to unwind ourselves and free ourselves from these domination-oriented systems that pit us against one another and that define so rigidly that there's only one way of being in the world. There's only one right way to do something. And just thinking about like the workplace example, right? I don't know if you saw this, I can't remember when it was, but there was a an article that came out that there was like more men named John as CEOs in the Fortune 500 than there were women. There was like 20 men named John as CEOs, and there was maybe like 3 women or something like that. You can strive as hard as you can to fit that mold, and yet these systems will still try and keep you down and punish you. And so the more that we're continuing to participate in them, the harder it becomes on us individually, and yet it doesn't advance us collectively in the same way. So I think that ultimately we need to completely revisit the ways in which we're defining our self-esteem and stop using it as, oh, I'm XYZ better in this way and I'm ABC worse in this way, and instead say, I'm a unique individual. This person is a unique individual, and both of us, in fact, can be happy and have a lot to contribute, and we can build a world where we can both be who we really are without competing against one another.
Yeah, I really, really like that. I've been having a similar conversation, a parallel conversation with my son, and he's talking about like wanting to do this and that with soccer. And it's like, okay, and, talking about his soccer mates and who's better and who's not, who's the better player. And I was like, you know what, this is a fruitless exercise. The only person you're competing with truly is yourself. Like, how were you yesterday versus today? And he's a little young to get that. And I might be wrong there, so feel free to redirect me. No. But that's sort of how I've always looked at things. It's like there's a lot of people at the table, and talent certainly, and we'll get to we're going to talk about talent and effort. When we combine those two things, that's how we move forward. It's like what our God-given, our natural talents are, inherent talents, our intrinsic talents, and then the effort that we put forward. But it doesn't matter how good you are relative to so-and-so, like someone right beside you. It actually matters how much more you're improving. Like what's the tangent or what's the arc of your improvement? Because that's the trajectory that you want to be following, not where you are right now versus someone else.
I often think like the best way is the mantra that I use is stop looking sideways and look backward at where you have been and forward at where you want to go. Yeah. And like whenever I catch myself falling into an old happy trap of comparison, I'm like, you're looking sideways. Stop and look back and forward. And somehow it helps because eventually maybe the ideal would be that you stop looking in any direction and you just exist as an enlightened being. But I think for most of us, that's probably a little bit too ambitious. I know it is for me. And instead, it's helpful to redirect my attention in a different direction.
And we're like, we exist in the fifth dimension.
Exactly. That'll be the next chat.
Okay, so let's talk about the lies. You mentioned the lies. I just wanted to double click on each of them. The first lie, that you're not enough. Talk a little bit about this lack lie, like that you're never going to be good enough, this tyranny of the perfect self.
Yeah, I have this idea in there, which I call the perfect self. And this is the magical version of you that lives in your head that you are comparing yourself to 24/7. And the perfect self is perfect at everything. They look perfect, they work perfectly, they parent perfectly, they partner perfectly, they have a clean house all of the time, they're always getting their workouts in, they never miss an important deadline. The perfect self is this master who we are constantly berating ourselves because we never measure up to it. And this perfect self it's not like we're comparing ourselves to other people in this case. We're comparing ourselves to the vision that old happy has painted for us from these, individualistic, capitalist, and domination-oriented forces. And the more that we continue to compare ourselves to them, the less time we have to discover who we uniquely are. And the more that we chase perfection, the less time we have to spend with our true internal selves, which are our good, loving, connected, nurturing, caring, creative selves that have so much to offer the world and get oppressed and hidden by the pursuit of perfection.
Yeah, that's the unrelenting taskmaster that lives in my head rent-free. It's like the second that I sit down after a day and I'm like, I'll just see what's going on Instagram, or I just want to see what's on YouTube.
How dare you?
How could you not? There's stuff in the sink,
yes.
Or there's,
oh my God, that's mine too. Or there's stuff like the counter isn't clean.
Right. Totally. Okay. You write in the book, and I actually pulled this out. It's just a small sentence, but it was so impactful for me. Mm-hmm. You are good and you are imperfect, and you will always be both. I just love that, because I was like, always? Oh my God, no, that's right. I will always be good and I will always be imperfect. Mm-hmm. And those two things are the constants for as long as I live.
Exactly. It's like somehow old happy convinced us that imperfect means bad. And in fact, our imperfection is where our humanity comes from, and our humanity is the source of our goodness. So how could we ever be bad? How could we ever berate ourselves for our imperfections if we really believe that to be true? And for me, that's been a profound realization that has probably changed my life in so many ways that I can't even pinpoint at this time, because that belief that my flaws or my issues or my failures made me a bad, unworthy person was what drove me then to kind of seek out achievement and success, and thinking that those were the path to happiness. And so it's almost like it allows you to sort of let go of the second lie, which we can get to in a second, of course, if you want to. And then it allows you to just exist as a human being and to accept and appreciate yourself.
So I love this line, and this is going to become a Post-it note somewhere. You will be good, you are good, and you're imperfect, and you'll always be both. I think where people can get confused, myself included, when I say people, is in the current climate, let's say, with the advent of social media, you see someone making a mistake, malicious or not, the intent was not malicious, and they are doxxed, they're canceled, people come after them, like this sort of cancel culture mob-like mentality. How dare you make a mistake? And I think that that's where, at least something that I've observed over the last several years, where we are very careful, then we start to self-regulate and self-censor and say, oh gosh, I can't make a mistake. I have to be on the right side of whatever issue is being presented at the time. But I think that there is something pure and beautiful in what you're saying, insofar as we are imperfect, and that is what the imperfection is what connects us to our humanity. It's like to err is human. It's like that, to err is human, to forgive, divine, as the saying goes, but that is part of it's like, welcome to the human race. You're going to make an error. And one of the examples that I often give when I've been teaching other practitioners, or even just as a parent teaching my sons, is like, when my children were little, I didn't scream at them for not being able to crawl. I wasn't like, oh, you idiot. Like,
how dare you?
You're 6 months old. Like, get with the program. You were working on this for 6 months. Nobody talks like that to an infant who is developing these motor skills, right? Like motor skills is a skill. It's you are learning something kinesthetically. But somehow in our own journey, our own personal development, we hate being beginners. We hate making mistakes, because when you are like learning a language, for example, is a perfect example. Right now I'm sort of learning multiple languages, and I often make mistakes because I'm switching words from Italian to Portuguese. So I'm seeing all the errors and I'm getting really frustrated. But one of the things that I know about neuroscience, and perhaps you can comment on this as well, is that in the moment of when you are most frustrated, that's actually when the most learning takes place, because your brain is so focused on the error that you're trying to fix it. And then that's like the growth of the new neural connections. That's the growth of the new nuclei, et cetera, et cetera. Can you comment on that? Am I off base here?
No, you said that so beautifully. And gosh, like, what a compassionate way to look at yourself, right? Like, to say, that's my brain. My brain is frustrated right now, and that means it's learning, instead of my brain is frustrated right now, and that means I'm a failure and I'll never be able to figure this out.
Right.
It's devastating. And then obviously what happens? What happens when you say that to yourself? You want to give up. Like, why do
I even try? I'm such a
why
loser.
Bother, right? Exactly. I think that it can be really helpful, because most of us have worked in a company or in a workplace before. And so we've had a boss, and thinking about, okay, when you have had a boss who, let's say, yells at you all the time, tells you all the ways you're failing, points out all of your flaws, continually pin pokes and says, like, don't forget, you're bad. Like, how do you perform in that workplace? How do you show up? Do you shine? Do you find yourself rising to the challenge? Do you develop new skills and new qualities? I would be willing to guess not. I'd be willing to imagine that those experiences make you feel small. They make you want to protect yourself. They make you want to hide away, because you're experiencing a form of bullying. And the same is true in our own heads. If you have a manager, though, who encourages you and who says, great job, so proud of what you're doing, isn't it fantastic what you've been able to do? That was a great success, so on. It's a lot easier to be able to do your best work.
Yeah, you had something about I can't recall exactly how you worded it, but it was like, here's a job posting. You have to work 24 hours a day. It's like, you can never rest, you can never make a mistake, and you're not going to be paid for it. But if you make a mistake, gosh, you're going to get a tongue lashing. Like, would you ever apply for that job? And I'd be like, of course not. So,
Never. It would go viral as the worst job that you could ever possibly apply for. That's the job that you're signing up for when you agree to live in alignment with the perfect self and their tyrannical demands, because it's like signing up to work with the world's worst boss.
Yeah, the world's worst boss, right in your own head, rent free. Yes, you mentioned the second lie, you'll be happy when. So this is the outcome lie. So the old happy dictates that you must achieve the expected outcomes. Like you must achieve, never rest. And I think in discussing this, it might be helpful if we parse between extrinsic goals, intrinsic goals, because I think that this is where we can start to unhitch ourselves from that old happy paradigm and start to move towards the new happy that you talked about. So let's talk about that.
So extrinsic goals are goals that you pursue because you think that getting them will bring you something else. So for example, success, fame, power, possessions, popularity, these things we think will bring us happiness once we have them. We don't choose them for ourselves, though. They're imposed upon us by our society and by the messages that we receive about what we should do and how we should live. And so many of us obviously believe that, oh, if I can just get that promotion, then I'll be happy. Or if I can just be able to reach XYZ level of success or this amount of wealth or power or fame or whatever it is, then I will experience lasting happiness. But it doesn't work that way. And not only do these goals not make us happy when we achieve them, they actively deplete our psychological needs as we pursue them. So it's an experience of unhappiness along the way and then unhappiness at the end. And you might have a moment at the end once you've gotten there to say of a moment of joy. But what I hear from people more often is, I worked for 10 years to become a doctor, or I went to law school thinking it would make me happy, or I tried to publish a book and then I got there and then I felt happy for like 5 minutes and then afterwards I felt nothing at all.
Yeah. And I think that, to your point, you talk about this idea that, as alluring as they may be, they're never going to make you happy because they can never fulfill your intrinsic goals, right? The things that are going to satisfy who we are as people, like our fundamental, our souls, or, however you might want to describe it. So let's talk a little bit about intrinsic goals. How do we begin to distinguish? Because sometimes there can be overlap between them.
For sure.
But the intention maybe is different. So talk a little bit about intrinsic goals.
I think that's a really important distinction. So intrinsic goals are ones that are aligned with your true self. And so if we think back to what we just talked about your true self is good and it's human and it's imperfect. There are things that you have an innate desire to do, or a curiosity about, or an interest in, or a passion for. So let's say that you're really passionate about gardening and you don't really know why, but you just have this curiosity. You think, I would love to have a garden someday. That's an intrinsic goal because it's coming from within you. It's not being imposed from the world that says, hey, gardening is the way to be the coolest person on the block or the way to get the most money or fame or success or anything like that. It's the imagery I think is really helpful is like, is it springing forth from within you, or is it being imposed from the outside upon you? And intrinsic goals are the ones that come from within. And what's really interesting is that we can see people who pursue intrinsic goals and then they end up achieving some of the results of those extrinsic goals, but they have done it in a way that makes them happy. And so in the book, I have this example contrasting Andre Agassi and Roger Federer, who are both tennis champions. And Agassi was forced into playing tennis by his dad, who wanted him to be the world's greatest tennis player and who essentially pushed him down that path. He did not have any sort of autonomy in that decision. Federer, on the other hand, loved to play tennis. He just loved it. It sprang from within him, and that love propelled him into winning and achievement and success and fame and all of that kind of stuff, but he wasn't doing it for those reasons. And so the best thing to do is to pay attention and attend to those things that are coming from within you and then try to follow it, because there is a part of you that knows what is right for you. And our job is to start to learn how to listen to it.
That's so good. My husband and I have these conversations all the time, and he will often say to me, okay, so imagine if tomorrow you win the lottery and you're set for life. No, like money is never, like everything's taken care of and then some. Your kids are taken care of and their kids are taken care of. Like the generational wealth is there. What would you do? And so we've had these long conversations, and this was especially true when I was thinking about how I was restructuring my business. The one thing that I know I'm always going to do is this podcast. I love the studying in preparing for this interview, for example. I love the images in your book. I love reading. I love preparing. I love understanding someone's worldview or their body of work, and then having a conversation about it. I just love that. So that's something I would always do. And I probably always write because I like to write.
Well, I can tell, by the way, like I can tell from talking to you that this is intrinsically motivated. I can feel it. I can feel your passion and your excitement and your energy. And it's evident through the care in which you've prepared for this interview and the ways in which you've thought through these questions and engaging this conversation. Like I can tell. And so it's no surprise to me that this podcast is so successful and does so well because you love to do it. And it's that intention that's driving it forward. And that's what makes it appealing as a guest, but also as a listener. It's a mistake to go out and seek those ends because it's really the means and the practice and the pathway that ultimately is going to bring you fulfillment, and then potentially even those other external things, which are of course always nice and helpful. We all have to survive under capitalism. I'm not saying that none of us can have goals to make money and like to be able to provide for our families or anything like that. But thinking that once you get there, you'll be happy is pretty much always a mistake, in my opinion.
It's always a lie. And and sometimes, I mentioned before, because in the book you were talking about, well, an extrinsic goal might be like money, accolades, fame, perfect body, perfect looks, perfect this, perfect that. But you could also, from an intrinsically motivated place, like the intention might be, I really want to nourish my body because I feel like it's worth nourishing. Like I want to grow my own food in the garden in the back. I want to go and lift weights, or I want to go for a run. I want to do my Pilates. I want to be strong. I want to have pliable muscles, good joint health, etc. I want to be able to move and feel good in my body. Can be an intrinsically versus like I want to have the perfect body and everyone's going to comment on my quads. I don't know. Like just
totally how hot I am. Exactly.
Yeah.
No, you've nailed it, because that is 100% an intrinsic goal. You feel good along the way. Like, look, I was able to lift up my kid and I didn't struggle for breaths. I was able to hold them and walk around. What a great feeling to be able to have that experience and that connection with my child. Or I went for a long walk with my friends and I felt good after. I didn't feel depleted. Like those moments of, wow, like I'm feeling good and fulfilled in the moment. That is the best thing that you can do if you want to identify which path that you're on and where you might need to make adjustments. And you can, as you're describing, you can shift off of it. Maybe you decided to start an exercise program because you were extrinsically motivated. But if you want to switch it, you can just start paying attention to, hey, like what was the moment when I felt really good and accomplished in the weight set I was doing today? Or when I made a different food choice and then I felt better after and I paid attention to it. Like start noticing how it aligns with you and your internal self, and you can start to actually shift off of that path.
I don't even mind if someone says, hey, like I need to lose weight. My doctor said it, or I just don't feel good. Like I want to look better. Like it can initially, like you said, it can initially start off extrinsically, like wanting to look better, wanting to see numbers on the lab change, etc. But then, I mean, that was my story. Like I got into, working out because I'm vain, I was like, I want to look good, like I want to look good. Just again, being truthful and honest and open. But it's shifted over time to, this is really good for my mental health. This helps me show up as a better mother. This is going to help me age well. This is going to help me be a good grandmother, in 20, 30-ish, whatever, 40 years. So I can play with my grandkids and enjoy my life in the way that, I've sort of envisioned it. So it can start off extrinsically motivated. Like that's not a bad thing.
No.
Like maybe you start off wanting to make a lot of money. Okay. Yeah. And then how can you do that so that, and we'll talk about how you can sort of uncover your gifts and provide value and give it away, so that both of those things maybe are met.
Yeah, exactly.
The last lie I wanted to talk about, because this for me has been something that I've only just recognized in myself, which is that
the deepest lie. It's the hardest one to notice. Okay. So you're not alone.
Okay. I'm so happy you said that, because I was like, damn, I only have just sort of recently come into this idea that we need other people.
It's totally fine.
The third lie is that you're on your own, that we are not connected to others. And as I was reading your book, I was like, good grief, it's everywhere. Like I have an iPhone, I have an iPad, I have, it's like
oh my God, I didn't even notice that. You're totally right.
It's like everything is like I, individual, me, and there's nothing wrong with that. And we are also connected to everybody else, right? We are all snowflakes, stars in the sky, all the things. And I used to think there's a really funny line from, I'm going to forget, it's with Hugh Grant, About a Boy actually is the name.
I love that movie.
So he, takes on this child, but before he sort of starts to be a mentor figure, a father figure to this child, he's like, no, I'm an island. I'm Ibiza. I'm Ibiza. I'm just like I'm a Hamlet, like no one else in, just me. And I used to think that way too, because I used to have this story that I have since I'm continuing to shed, but like sort of broken through this idea that I'm the only one who's going to care about me ever. Right. So and I'm sure that I hope that I'm not the only one who can relate to that thinking, but we do really need each other. We really are connected, and we are so much more, at least I can say in my lived experience, we are so much more alike than we are different. We like to pretend that we're like a special snowflake,
Yes.
and so there's certain ways that we are unique and beautiful, and we are all connected. So talk a little bit about the separate lie, why it's the hardest one to recognize. So if you're 45 and you're like, what? It's fine.
It's totally fine. You're not alone. It's hard because we're in separate bodies, right? Like we look different. We have different names. We grow up in different ways. We have feelings and thoughts that are our own and are private. And all of that is true. And at the same time, as you're saying, we are all so utterly dependent upon one another, and every single thing that we do is enabled by other people. And to your point about the line from About a Boy, we are conditioned into believing that we are islands and that we don't need anybody. And a lot of that stems from not having our needs met, especially when we're little, right? Like if you grow up and potentially you have trauma in your life, or you have parents who are not supported, so therefore they can't support you, you might end up having to fulfill your own needs at a very early age. And that can make you fiercely independent and ultimately find it very hard to trust people or lean on other people. We talked a little bit about the conditioning of women, how women are taught to have to handle everything by themselves and to make it look like they're, what's that metaphor? Like a swan on a lake, like gliding smoothly, but with the legs paddling.
It's like super frantic. Yeah,
exactly. Like, I got this, y'all. I'm good. I've got everything under control. Yeah. We're taught that suffering is shameful, that if you're struggling, if you have a problem, that means you're bad. So that loops around to the first lie. If you need help from somebody else, you are an embarrassment. I think for me, one of the things that most helped me to see this and how toxic it is this idea of if somebody is struggling, if they need help, we treat them like they are completely flawed. And then we do everything we can to make them independent again, to be able to handle all of their problems by themselves. And that is the only way that we describe somebody as being healed or better from whatever pain they're in. And
gosh, that's so true.
It's just like, we need each other. And individualism has convinced us that we do not need each other and that we should be able to do all of this stuff by ourselves because we are alone. But all this does is, one, it places such a heavy burden upon you because no one can handle their burdens alone. Absolutely nobody. You're already not handling them alone, but we can get to that in a second because it's kind of a whole other philosophical discussion of the ways in which we are constantly helping each other. But the second is that when you're separate, you don't have to care about anybody else. It's just you. You're the only one who you're responsible for. Your needs are the ones that matters. Your wants are more important than anything else. And ultimately, I believe that this idea of separation has led to a very self-centered culture where people feel like they have to focus on themselves above all else in order to be happy. And yet they have been lied to because the only way to truly be happy is to also focus on other people. Yeah. And we become more and more unhappy. Therefore, we become more and more self-centered, and then that makes us more unhappy, and we don't know how to break out of it. And that's the challenge of this lie.
Yeah, but I'm totally a boy mom, but it's like the McQueen series, right? Yes. If you've ever seen the Disney, the car movies, where it's like the first thing is all about him. He's like the big race car driver. Totally. And then, the third movie is about him sort of passing on his wisdom to the next, big race car driver or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's, he had a really hard time doing that because he was so used to being the center of attention, and he couldn't come to grips that he was getting older and slower, and there were new cars that were faster. Okay, so anyway,
no, it's a great metaphor. Isn't this not one of the most common stories that we tell? Like, the star football player is a jerk to everybody else on the team, and the team doesn't win until he realizes that his job is to be a part of the team and to contribute to other people, right? It's well, there are so many, even About a Boy, which again, I haven't watched in years, but was one of my favorite movies when I was younger. And that's the same story. He's alone, he's miserable, and then he takes an interest in a child who needs him, and then his life becomes meaningful. It's the same thing we see over and over again, and yet we continue to operate under the delusion that we're separate and that we can abandon our connections to one another.
Yeah, and you talk about this, I think there's a Friends episode where one of them, I think it was Matt LeBlanc, I forget his name on the show, but he says to Phoebe, which now I know that's the character on the show, I can't remember her actual name, but anyway, he says something like, every time you do something for others, you're also serving yourself. So at the end of the day, it's selfish. And so she goes on this whole thing where she's like, no, I'm going to try and figure out how this is not like what is something that's purely altruistic, where it's not serving something for myself as well. And it's interesting because I remember watching that episode years ago and thinking like, what's wrong with that though? What's wrong with helping someone else and it also being beneficial to you? Exactly. Because I think that the way that we use the word, back to this sort of individualistic culture, the word selfish by definition has such a negative connotation. And I would argue that being selfless, right? So not having anything to do with the self is actually far worse. So she goes and she tries to do good things for everyone. And then she realizes she gets this little boost, or she gets like something comes back to her in a positive way. And I just love that. And I think like to your point, like, when we're talking about trying to understand the new happy, how we can actually be happy. Part of that is understanding that connectedness to other people, and that in giving something to someone else, doing something for someone else, it comes back to us in ways that we could never imagine.
Exactly. And like, I think one of the things that's most interesting to build on that about this idea of separateness versus connectedness is separateness is what drives that phrase that we have all heard so many times, which is like, don't put other people first. Put yourself first. The idea of first. Who goes first? And that only works if you are separate from another person, because then you have to take turns, or one goes one way or the other. But if you're connected, then it's just like what happens in that Friends episode. When you're connected to another person and you do something kind for them to help them, both of you get to move forward at the same time. Or if you do something kind for yourself, you are also moving both of you forward at the same time too, because you're contributing to yourself, which is connected to them. So there's no trade-off required here. There's no saying like, I have to do this thing only for me. When you go out and you do a workout, you're not just doing it for yourself. As you said, you're doing it because it makes you a better mother, makes you a better friend. It helps you to be better at your job. So you're already doing it. It's just about the framing and the recognition that we are connected, and that nothing we do is for us alone. And with that awareness in mind, we can make much wiser choices that allow us to not only create happiness for ourselves, but for other people at the same time.
I have a question about asking for help.
Yes.
And so this is a bit of a flip side because, on the one hand, I love to help other people. I get a lot of pleasure from it. I feel good about myself. So maybe there is no such thing as altruism, and that's fine. I have a very difficult time asking for help. I will try to figure something out on my own. I will try to do something because I feel like I am burdening someone. I am inconveniencing someone to take time out of their, very busy and important life to try and figure out something, or try to, help me with something. So why is it so hard to ask for help when clearly we derive so much pleasure from helping others? Why do we have that paradox, at least in our minds?
It's because of old habit. It's because asking for help proves that you're not good enough. It shows that you haven't been able to hack it by yourself. Asking for help violates that you do everything by yourself, as you mentioned, and asking for help violates that you are able to go out and pursue your goals and do it independently. So at every stage, it goes against our conditioning, everything that we've been told will make us happy. And so we think, okay, if I don't ask for help, then it will be more likely to make me happy, when really the opposite is true. And what I would say to, because I know that you're not alone, I think people struggle so much with this, ask somebody for help, you're helping them because you're giving them a chance to experience happiness. You are giving them an opportunity to feel more joy, to feel a sense of self-esteem, to have a greater purpose in life, to strengthen your connections with them. Because what are relationships without helping? Like, what are they without that act of giving and receiving? If you have a friend and you never let them in, you never tell them what's going on, you never ask them for advice, you never ask them to pick you up and drive you to an appointment, you never lean on them in any way, how rich do you think that friendship will be? Like, the quality of our relationships is determined by the ways in which we are willing to be vulnerable and ask for help and to give help in return. So if you are refusing to ask for help, it's not your fault if you find it hard, but it is our responsibility to overcome it, because that's what will allow people to experience happiness in their lives.
Yeah, it's this concept around, you talk about this, like this ecosystem versus the ecosystem. I often like to think about it as, are we self-made or are we community-made? You know, greats like Arnold Schwarzenegger has said things like, the only reason why I'm successful is because I've been able to stand on the shoulders of giants, right? So talk a little bit about the difference between an ego system and an ecosystem, or, you know, I frame it slightly differently, like self-made, community-made.
Yeah. I love your framing. The idea that anybody could be self-made is patently ridiculous, because it's
false.
It's so false that I could spend an hour ranting about how false it is. Like, who made you? Was it your parents who raised you and fed you and nurtured you and got you to school on time? Was it the teachers who taught you all of your classes? Was it the friends who encouraged you to discover your strengths? Was it the first boyfriend or girlfriend that you had and the way that they helped you to blossom into yourself? Was it your college professor or your first boss, or the culture that you've immersed yourself in, or the people who you follow online, or the books that you've read, or the television that you've watched? You are made. Like yeah. You are made by all of that. I've never done a single thing in my life by myself, not one. And I never will. And the more that I acknowledge that, the happier I become, because there's so much pressure off. There's so much relief in going, I don't have to do this by myself. And in fact, I never have done anything by myself. It's all a lie. It's sort of like this mirage that has never really existed that we have to wipe away. And there's so much strength in acknowledging that your community is what made you, because why would you not want to share the fruits of your success with all of the people who contributed to it? You know, why would you not want to elevate the fact that you had a fourth grade teacher who encouraged you to do something, and then you've carried that with you for your whole life? We are made by the words and the gestures and the offers that other people have provided to us. And acknowledging that is not weakness, it's strength, because it shows just how much goes into making one person.
Right. It takes a village, as they say.
Yeah, exactly.
You talk about in your quest to shed the old happy and in the new happy is to looking for ways that you can help. So there's three questions that you say: how can I help? Who helped me? And where are others helping? And that those three questions have the power to make you and others happier every single day. So how can we look at each of these questions as a way to start understanding happiness?
It's sort of like my new shift on gratitude, like a new elevated version of gratitude, because that's really all gratitude is noticing what other people have contributed to you. But it's been washed down as to be like, oh, I'm grateful for my smoothie or whatever. I'm grateful for my success. And we've sort of lost the origins of gratitude, which is paying attention to the person who made your smoothie or who bought it for you, or the people who contributed to your success. And so the first question is, where can I help? And that's about looking for moments in your day where you can contribute to other people's well-being. And that can be really small. It can be a text to a friend who's having a hard time, or checking in with a colleague who has a lot on their plate and seeing if there's anything you can do to help. Somebody's Instagram post. Like, I can't tell you as a creator how much my day is made when people send me a nice comment, right? It makes a huge, huge difference. And they might not even know how much it means. Those moments provide so much for me personally and continue to fuel me to keep going. So thinking about those little moments. And then the second question is, where are others helping? So I am the beneficiary of all of these acts of help, like those comments, and I might miss them. I might not pay attention to them. I might take them for granted, unfortunately. So we have to open our eyes and look at all of the ways in which people are contributing to our well-being, that's what helps us to feel connected to the broader world around us. And then the third is, where are other people helping? So all around us, there are people doing good in the world who are showing up in their communities, who are making insightful pieces of work or contributing of their gifts and their talents, helping people who are struggling. And it's so easy to forget those gestures when everything that's in the news is so sad and so filled with things that are people doing that are hurting others. And so we have to really pay attention to those moments of good, to remember that the human race is full of beauty, it's full of goodness and kindness, and it's out there. We just have to start to notice it and pay attention to it.
Yeah, I think that's an important, I don't know if you intentionally meant to bring this up, but I feel like they never report on the planes that land. You know, like if you overly pay attention to the news, like it's just about grabbing your attention. Yeah. So they are going to try to hijack. It's like a race to the bottom of the brainstem.
So
it's
true.
Like, how are we going to hijack your fear centers?
Yeah.
And how are we going to keep your attention by making you think that there are threats? Now, I'm certainly not suggesting that there are not threats and there are not conflicts that are devastating. I am saying that your attention is the price. Your attention, like if you don't have to pay to watch the news, you are the commodity. You are the thing that they are trying to extrapolate and manipulate and control. And so, you know, it goes back to that quote earlier that I read to you where it's like, imagine how much harder you would be to control if you were super happy with everything that you had. And if you were satisfied with your life, you're like, actually, I'm in heaven right now. This is perfect.
Totally.
I don't need anything else. You're much harder to control versus infecting you like a mind virus with the fear and the fear mongering. And like I said, this race to the bottom of the brainstem in order to keep your attention so that they can sell you things, their advertisers and all the things that the news sort of runs on. And there are some Instagram accounts, I will say, I think there's like Good News Movement and we'll tag them in the show notes. There are a couple of accounts that I follow that are just, you know, man saves cat from a tree or, you know, stuff where you're like, oh, you know, reunited
moments of goodness.
Moments of goodness where you're like faith in humanity restored.
Exactly. Like, I think no one is saying that doesn't matter. Of course, we should be solving it and we should be paying attention to it. But we also have to make sure that we have the faith in humanity that motivates us. Because unfortunately, what I am seeing a lot of now is a great deal of cynicism and apathy of saying, we won't be able to fix this. We're too far gone. We're too screwed. You know, we won't be able to help save our planet. We won't be able to solve these conflicts. There's nothing that we can do. And that mindset is going to make that a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. Speaking of humanity, this is one of the prongs, if you will, of when we're talking about how we can find happiness and this new happy. For the first piece, we've been talking about a little bit like, where are people helping? How have people helped me? How can I help? And then the next is the uncovering your gifts, which may be hard for some people because they've never been told what their gifts are. That's never been reflected to them. So you talk about every human being having a gift, or having a set of gifts, and you can triangulate them using your humanity, your talents, and your wisdom. So let's talk a little bit about how we can uncover our gifts and what our humanity has to do with it.
Yeah. So your humanity gifts are about who you are as a person. It's that true self we've talked about, your good, loving self. It's the source of your character. So all of the things that we celebrate and elevate, if you think about a eulogy that's given at a funeral, usually what people talk about is the humanity gifts that the person displayed. You know, this person was such a great mom. They were so loving and generous. They always were trying to give what they could to other people. They were patient in hard times, right? They elevate and share those humanity gifts. And what's funny is that we take them so for granted, even though they're the most important source of our happiness and our well-being. We tend to think like, oh, that's just normal. That's just how people should behave. And that's not true at all. Your humanity gifts are extraordinary, and they are what create positive relationships. They are what create healthy and peaceful societies. They are what inspire us to show up and build things that are meaningful and that help other people. And so the best way to get in touch with them is, I think, learning to tap into the love that is within you. Like, you have this source of love that you can tap into and access at any point in time. And the more that you can start to uncover that, then you can start to share it and identify, okay, where is my love needed and in what form is it needed? Is love right now honesty? Is it kindness or compassion? How can I express that loving nature that I have to other people?
So when I read this, I was like, okay, yes, no, I have a lot of love,
Yeah.
a really big heart, but sometimes I feel disconnected from it, right?
Yes.
Sometimes, you get into your stories, or maybe you haven't slept well, or, whatever it is. You just feel, maybe you've been scrolling on the news too much, and you just feel disconnected. You feel hopeless. What are some of the ways that we can, because it's like the airplane analogy, like you got to give to yourself, put the mask on yourself before you put the mask on to the person next to you. How do we start to reconnect with that love within us if we've been many years feeling disconnected from ourselves and then living in that old happy paradigm? I have to do it all myself. I got to be perfect. How do we begin to rekindle that spark of love and start directing it towards ourselves so that we can, like the cuppeth floweth over?
I think that one way that's really helpful is to recognize that there are parts of you that are in pain, that are struggling, that are afraid. And then there's a part of you that is your true self. And that's the source of your love and your care. And so that would be like in internal family systems, they call that the self. In most religious or spiritual traditions, they call it the soul, or whatever word they have for the true self. And that is the part of you that is always present and you can always tap into. So what I would recommend is taking a couple minutes and just going to sit somewhere quiet, or even doing it as you're doing something else. And just imagine that there's that part of you, that loving part of you, and then ask it to give love to another part of yourself. So let's say, for example, you've made a mistake today and you're having a really hard time. Pause and say, okay, loving self, can you give love to that part of me that's in pain right now, that's struggling? And see what comes up, see what happens, because what most of the time will be engendered is a loving response from within you, almost like a hand from inside of you reaching out to comfort another part of you. And that lights the spark, as you so beautifully describe it, right? It shows you that you have this beautiful amount of love within you that can be shared. And then sometimes, if you can't access it that way, you can also start to tap into it by expressing it outward to other people. So that might be, one thing that I love to do is whenever I pass somebody on the street or have a phone call with somebody, I always like to start by mentally saying, like, I send you love. I'm sending you my love right now, and kind of expressing it mentally to that person. And it allows me to tap into that sense of love inside of me, and then to feel like it's flowing and expressed and shared outward. And then from there, I can express it inward as well.
It's like a Care Bear stare.
I love that.
Care Bear staring you right now.
I love it. I receive it and I feel it.
Okay. So humanity is who we are and talent is what we do. So how do we discover our talents? I think this is difficult because this is the thing that we are naturally adept at. So we just think everyone is like that. We just think everyone is good at insert skill, right?
Totally. Yeah. What's fascinating is in my research, I discovered that basically there is one path that you take to develop a talent, and every single person does it. And so that means that if you want to become more talented at something, you can just walk this path and you can just follow this very basic set of instructions, which is essentially to start with that intrinsic motivation. What's the thing that's coming from within you, that's springing forth from within? And then say, okay, what is the smallest task that I can take on that would help me to get a little bit better at this? So let's say, for example, I'll talk about writing, like you want to become a writer. Okay, cool. What have you written before? Have you never written anything? And in that case, I would say, set a task for yourself of, I'm going to write a 200-word little blog post or a little article or whatever it is, something really short, something that feels achievable but difficult. So what's going to happen is that's going to put you into a flow state where you are able to merge with the task that you're doing. And that's what allows you to develop new skills and competencies. Then when you're done, you'll come out of that flow state. You'll go back to being a regular person with your regular level of consciousness. And there you can say, okay, tomorrow or next week, I'm going to do a 500-word piece instead. And you just keep doing that over and over and over again. It creates these like upward spirals of getting better and better and better at something. And basically, That's how anyone has ever developed a talent, is through being in an environment that helps them to get into those flow states. So you might have already done this without knowing it to develop the talents that you already have. That means that you can continue developing them if you want to, or you can decide that you'd like to do something different, potentially if your existing talents are more extrinsically oriented and you want to try something new and take that on.
I love that. So if you're someone who wants to write a book, or you want to be a speaker, or you want to start a cooking show, or, whatever it is, it's like, what's the smallest little thing that you can do in that direction, and then consistently do that over a long delta, right? And then make the tasks like slightly more complex each time.
Yeah, just a little bit harder. Like, think of them as stepping stones. Like, you just want to escalate it a tiny little bit, because that way it won't be too much for your, for your overwhelmed brain to get too scared of, which is often the problem, to be honest. Like, I spent so much of my life being scared of developing my talents, and then I wasted so much time doing that as well. So I didn't realize I was trying to take on too much, and I had to start with something that was much smaller.
Yeah. And then the other thing you talk about with talent, like if you're having a really hard time, is first like sample a lot of things, like try a lot of things, see what kind of sticks, but look for ease, and then ask for feedback. Ask people like, what do you think I'm good at? Like, what do you think I'm really great at? But the ease part I thought was really interesting. So can you expand a little bit on when you're getting close to or approximating what one of your gifts might be, or your talent, you could further develop a talent.
Yeah.
What does it feel like when we're getting close to it?
It feels like you're doing what you're supposed to do. It feels natural. It feels right inside of you. It feels like, oh, things are unfolding for me in this way, and I'm working hard. I'm striving to do my best, and I'm learning, and potentially I'm having those moments of frustration from my brain that you so beautifully described earlier. But it feels right. And I think one of the things that we have to learn how to do is learn how to distinguish between doing things that are wrong for you and the hard feeling that comes with that, versus doing things that are right for you and the hard feeling that comes with that. Because for example, the way I know this works is because I am a self-taught designer. So I make this artwork. I use it to communicate these concepts. I have no background in it. I have no training. I had to teach myself how to do all of it, from like learning how to make a circle in a design program all the way through to everything else. It was hard. It was hard in a way where I felt like I was expanding myself, like I was being stretched and expanded in that way. But I've also done things in my life, like pursuing my old extrinsic goals, that were hard, but they contracted me. I felt like I was being compressed. And I think it's almost like learning to notice those feelings. You probably have a lot of inherent talents that you've ignored because, as you said, you think everyone finds them easy, but they don't. Like, if you are able to tell an amazing story at a dinner party that gets everybody laughing and people leave and they talk about that dinner party for years because of what you told them, you probably have a talent for public speaking or for comedic timing or whatever it is, but you think everyone else has that when really it's something that's very special and unique for you. So if there's something where you find yourself going, oh, everyone else finds this hard, but I find it easy, that's another indicator that it could be a talent.
I love that. And I like the distinction between it should feel like ease, but it's not to say that it's not going to be hard.
Yeah.
Like that there's going to be skills that need to be acquired. There's going to be wisdom, which we're going to talk about in a moment, that's going to come with the time of, cultivating that talent. So I like that it should feel like it's easy to lean into.
Yeah.
And there's going to be work on the other end. Like, it's not just, this is sometimes I think where we can get things wrong with relationships as well. It's like, oh, it's not easy anymore, I'm out. You know?
Totally.
So I think that it's important to say, okay, this feels like it's right, and I'm willing to put in the hard work over a long period of time to make it happen.
And like, if it's intrinsically motivating, you'll want to do the work because you'll find value in it. You'll be the reward of, wow, look at how I'm growing. Look at how I'm developing all of these new qualities and how much better I was than last time. Again, like circling back to what we talked about, you find this intrinsic value in it that is inherently motivating for you versus, oh God, I have to show up and do this thing and like it's going to be such a drain and I'm going to be so depleted by it.
This is why I'm always in the top 1% of Duolingo's summary every year because I love languages. I'm doing 5 of them all at the same time. And I try.
Oh my gosh.
I'm always trying. Okay, so this is just a little thing. I'm always trying to get my kids. I'm like, okay, you have to do, like their father's Greek. So I'm like, you have to do Greek. I want you to learn Greek. It's like part of your heritage. And I want you to learn Portuguese. Like I'm Portuguese, it's part of your heritage. You know, and they're like, okay, fine. And it's just like, I'm dragging them along. Like they do it and then they forget for a couple of weeks and they do it again. And I am on like, I don't know how many hundreds of days I'm on now, but I love Duolingo so much. I know people say it's not the best app for learning a language and all that, but I enjoy it. So it brings me like my relaxation at the end of the day is doing half an hour to an hour if I have the time of Duolingo. It makes me so happy.
That's amazing. That's such a great example. My partner is doing has been doing French Duolingo for the last 2 years. And he's the same. I'm like, aren't you finding this to be a chore? Like, aren't you bored? Or like, no, he finds genuine enjoyment.
Joy.
Yes, totally.
It's joyful. Yes, I love it. I feel like I've missed opportunity to be an like a UN translator or something. But
you still can do it. You can still do it if you want to.
That's good. Right. Julia Child, I learned in your book, Julia Child only discovered food and she was 40.
And she's a legend. She just started in her 50s. Like there's so much time ahead of us. We can do it.
I can do it. All right. So closing down the podcast and going to go to the UN to be a translator. I love
We're done.
Yeah, we're done. Yeah, we're done.
I'm sorry, everybody.
All right. The last sort of prong, if you will, and sort of triaging and finding what your gifts are is your wisdom, what you know. So lived experience, that could be formal schooling, I'm assuming. That could also just be your own experiences to help people. We're all on the same path, just different points of the path, So talk a little bit about how wisdom can help us, what we know can help us to discover who we are, what our gifts are.
No one has ever lived your life, and no one will ever live your life except for you. And you have had, from the time that you were born all the way to today, hundreds of thousands of unique experiences that will be lost for time if you don't mind them and share them with people in ways that help and support them. People are so quick to dismiss their own wisdom, right? Like they're so quick to deny it and say, oh, I don't have anything to offer. But all of that time that you were living, you were gathering and accumulating all of these lessons and stories and ideas and perspectives that could profoundly change somebody else's life. And to your point about a rising tide, there are people who are like, let's say that you started your own business. There are lots of people who want to start their own business and who don't know how to get started and who you could help with that through what you have learned. And the same is true for all of your life experiences. And so I recommend that we look at the things that we have accomplished in our lives, the pain that we have overcome, the difficulties, the suffering that we have lived in our lives and trying to put it to use and turning pain into purpose. And then the opportunities that we have to learn from other people and to be able to instill their wisdom within us as well. All of this knowledge is so profound and powerful. And again, unless we recognize it as a gift, we're going to discount it and lose all that you have to offer.
Yeah. And I think that, at the end of the day, you said something like this in the book, but it's, our gifts are for us to give away, right? Like that's why they're a gift. Like all the things that we can certainly nourish our own soil, but then we also want to be planting seeds in the garden of life, if you will. Like we want to be helping other people and spreading the word, because otherwise it's kind of a waste, right?
Yeah,
it's kind of a waste if it just stays with you.
Exactly. It is. And as you plant those seeds, you are getting something from it. You're getting back so much from it as well, right? Through you expressing yourself, you become more and more of yourself. You become more of your authentic self. You have opportunities to expand and enrich your own life. And everything that we offer of ourselves, not only does it end up benefiting others, but it ends up benefiting ourselves at the same time. And I think that that's just the most miraculous thing in the world, that we can do those two things at once.
What do you think, in all of your research and sort of moving from this paradigm of old happy to new happy, what do you think has been most impactful for you in your own life, the way that you view happiness?
Yeah.
And what is your wish for, someone who picks up your book? What do you hope that they might take away? If there's 1, 2, 3 or more takeaways that you hope that they might take away from the book?
I think for me, the most impactful realization has been that the happiness that I was seeking was always available to me if I just reached out and helped somebody else. I think I never knew how service would provide me with everything that I was looking for in my life, and especially doing it in a way that's authentic and fulfilling for you simultaneously. So it's that integration of the two, the growth of the self in service of the collective. And I think that if we can find ways to do that, whether it's through our families or our work or our communities, and in whatever form is possible to take for you, given your life and your needs and your constraints and your opportunities, that it's the most satisfying way to live. It like knits everything together. And no matter what I feel or the challenges I have, I wake up every day excited to live my life and to feel like I'm growing and giving of myself at the same time. And I didn't know that that was possible to feel that way. And I think what I would also want people to take away is that when you live in this way, you're not only contributing to your happiness and the direct happiness of the people that you're helping, but you're also working to make a happier world for everybody as well. Like, we can redefine the way that we pursue happiness, and we can then use all of our talents to help solve the problems in the world and make this place better so that people don't have to suffer as much. And I think the fact that all of these things are intertwined together feels like such a profound gift. And I want people to feel inspired and empowered to take advantage of that.
Thank you so much. And where can people find the books? So this is The New Happy. Stephanie Harrison, of course, is the author. Where can we find your work?
You can find it at thenewhappy.com, and the book is available everywhere books are sold.
And you have a newsletter, don't you?
Yes, it's at the website as well.
Amazing. And I have to say, the images in the book are delightful. So they I mean, you were saying like I had to learn how to do the circle and then the square and then the colors overlapping and then the shapes and this, but it really, you know, as someone who is a visual learner, you know, I'll read the words, obviously that's visual, but then you see it in a picture and you're like, that makes a lot of sense. Like, I like the way that
clicks in more, right?
Clicks in, yeah. It's like a double click. So you hear, you know, so you read it with the words, and you're like, that makes sense. And then you see the image, you're like, oh, I get this. Okay, try lots of things. And then, I love that. Stephanie, a delight talking to you today. Thank you for sharing your gifts with us and your time and your presence and your focus. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. I feel the same. Thank you for your gifts and for all the ways in which you're making the world a happier place. I'm so thankful for you.
Thank you.